All right, that is all done. We'll put those with the other ones. And now that that print is all done, I think I'm just going to relax for a little bit. Maybe let's pull up Quora and see what questions people have for me in the realm of 3D printing. You know, I do kind of enjoy the questions that people ask on Quora. So let's jump back in there. Let's take a look at the questions people are asking and see what insights and maybe thought-provoking questions we can find, or just really dumb ones that maybe we can make fun of. Let's jump in, huh? All right, someone asks, what are the limitations of 3D printers available to the general public? That is a really interesting question because what do you mean by limitations? Are you talking about build volume? Sure, all 3D printers are limited by a build volume. Are you talking about speed? Because it's additive, the bigger the thing that you print, the longer it takes to print. So I guess build volume, design time, layer height, materials that you can use, how thin you can spread those materials on the layers to get really good layers. Overhangs, supports, how well those supports work. There are a ton of limitations involved with 3D printing, and I think it's really good to know what those limitations are. Do your research and get an idea of them before you get into it, because a lot of people think, oh, 3D printing, it can make anything. And while there is no limit to what 3D printing can make, that doesn't mean it's not limited. It's a manufacturing process, and every manufacturing process has its limitations. For instance, if you're going to do injection molding, you have to think about undercuts and where the mold will work. If you're going to do vacuum molding, you have to think about how it's going to fold out and come out. And if you're going to do 3D printing, you have to think about overhangs, bridging, and supports. YHT, which I did a video of a little while ago, so you can go check that out. But yeah, maybe that'll get you started. But do know those limitations. It's good that you realize that there are limitations. Somebody else asked, does hot glue work to glue 3D printed parts? Let's find out. Here I've got a couple of prints, one in PLA, one in Polysmooth. So we're going to try and glue together unlike parts. And I'm just going to squish this stuff on there. Yeah, and then I'm just going to squish, this on there. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. We're not necessarily fusing these together perfectly. In fact, we're using disc-like plastics to melt it together, and we're not really getting any melting between them, any sort of like wicking action like you would with solder. So is this going to hold to any degree? I don't know. We'll come back to that later.
You know what it's like. You see a cool new filament and you want to try it out, but as you're hovering over that buy button, you remember the last 3 spools of fancy filament that you bought, used for that one thing, and haven't used since. It sounds like you need the 3D Printing Professor Filament of the Month Club. Each month you'll receive a generous coil of just the good stuff, enough to work with it, but not so much that you'll feel guilty later.
Thanks, 3D Printing Professor. Wait, that's me.
Join the Filament of the Month Club today.
Oh, I think I just ruined my felt. Ugh. While we're waiting for that, someone asks, can a 3D printer make an acoustic guitar? I'm going to refer you to Clarissa in her channel, Make It and Fake It, where she 3D prints a acoustic ukulele. Now, again, it's a guitar versus a ukulele, but it's an acoustic instrument. A lot of people have 3D printed the shape of a guitar, but then made it an electrical guitar and put an amp in it and stuff like that. But Clarissa actually used the acoustics of a 3D print. And if I remember correctly, her conclusion was that really she didn't spend much money on it, only about $30 in parts. And it played like about a $30 ukulele, which is to say, it sounded very cheap and not very good. That said, it did play, and she played it at the end of the video, and it was amazing. I was really impressed. So technically, yes, but keep your expectations low. Then again, if you're on a deserted island and you really need a guitar to play to keep yourself entertained, and you have a 3D printer, which is a very, very specific problem to have. But yes, you could make a 3D printed acoustic guitar, and it would work, provided you also had string and the gears to do it. Maybe if you're on Mars, you know what? I'm overthinking this. Should I get a 3D printer so that I can print miniatures? 3D printers can print miniatures, and there are a lot of models out there for miniatures that you can 3D print, but not all of them are made for the specific 3D printing process that you might be using. You're going to have a hobby, and if you want to have that hobby, great, jump into it. I know a lot of people are making 3D printed miniatures. In fact, you should check out the channel of the 3D printing DM, who he talks about using a cheap 3D printer and the tricks that he's used to make those things work. I love his channel, so I'm going to refer you to that and say, check him out. All right, let's jump back into this print here. Oh, man. It's stuck to my felt. Got a drip in there. All right, so are these glued together? The answer is yeah, they're glued together fairly well, and they're not. I kind of expected that if I put a little pressure on them, that they would just kind of pop apart. But believe it or not, they seem to be fused together extremely well. So let me really rip on this. Oh my goodness. I think the print's going to give away. The glue is stretchy. I put a big bead of glue on here, and it's stretchy and holding on extremely well. Guys, hot glue gets the 3D printing professor endorsement for it works. What am I going to do with this thing now? Come on. Oh. Are there any sub $200 3D printers that can print at least 8x8x8 with good finishing quality? So basically you're asking, can I have a 3D printer that is big, that does a good job, and is cheap? I'll tell you what, buddy, I'll let you pick two. Not to say that 3D printers that are under $200 have bad finishing quality. In fact, I'm not quite sure what you mean by finishing quality. Are you basically saying that I can do a print and pop off a print and have it be perfect? No, that's just not feasible. Even with an expensive 3D printer, you're going to expect to put a little bit of time into finishing your print. So temper your expectations a little bit. That said, if you do get a cheap 3D printer, expect to put a lot of work and elbow grease and effort into getting it to work the way that you want. It can do it. Absolutely, it can do it. But don't think that it'll do it right off the bat. You're going to have to put some effort into it. And so it all depends on you. Now, that said, the more that you spend on a 3D printer, the less likely that you'll have to deal with some of that stuff. So, yeah, like I said, pick two. You'll get those easy. The third one depends on you and how much time and effort you're willing to put into it. So just be prepared for that. If you don't want to work, then the answer is no. If you're willing to work a little bit, then the answer is yeah. What is the best way to learn 3D software? Do it! There's so many 3D softwares that you can download that are free that you can start working on right now. That, yeah, just get it, do it, jump into it, do a project. I always say if you start with a project, and it doesn't have to be a useful project. In fact, I recommend you do something stupid and useless to begin with, and I've got a whole video about why I recommend that. But do something fun to begin with, and then you'll get the skills that you need to do something useful later. But just jump in and do it. Somebody asks, what should I print with a 3D printer? I'm open to suggestions. Low poly dinos? Where can I find the most complete and most accurate BOM for a 3D printer? What's a bomb? Bureau of Meteorology? No, I don't think so. Bank One Meritus? No. Bill of Materials. What you need, what you would need to make it. Reprap.org. Reprap.org will get you covered. Why didn't I know what a BOM was? Does 3D printing create toxic fume? Yes, but it's not as bad as people might lead you to think. There are some very simple things that you can do, the least of which is just don't be so close to your 3D printer. The particles seem to condense at about 10 feet, so just don't Just don't sleep next to your 3D printer. I covered all of this in a previous video. I will cover more about it in a future video. I've got some grand designs for that video that I just don't have time to implement. But yes, but it's not as big a deal as the scare tactic media might want to make you believe. There you go.
For behind-the-scenes information, step-by-step instructions of the builds featured, and much more, visit 3dpprofessor.com.
Someone asks, is it possible to 3D print a smartphone? Sure. Hold on for a second. Let me grab you. Here we go. Right here on GrabCAD, there is a model for a Motorola Droid 3. I don't guarantee that it'll work, but it'll look like a smartphone. You could be tapping away on your ineffective piece of plastic on the bus, and people might think that you have a smartphone. Or they might think that you're plumb crazy. I don't know. Yes, it can print the shape of a smartphone. Now, can it print functional electronics? Can you essentially circumvent capitalism and just hit go on your 3D printer and get a fully functional piece of equipment? We are not living in Star Trek yet, guys, okay? We're not there yet. But you can print a smartphone shape thing, so I guess there you go. Do any businesses make their products from a 3D printer? Now, I assume that you're asking, do any businesses make commercial end products that they sell to people on a 3D printer? For which the answer is not that you will buy in the store. Because 3D printing is such a slow process, it's more usable for low-run manufacturing, maybe 500 units. And if you're selling 500 units, you're not going to be selling those at a department store. Department stores are for things that are made in the tens of thousands. So far there have been very limited examples of people who have made things on a 3D printer that they then directly sold to the public. And they were very cool examples. I'm thinking in particular of the Square Helper. It's a little tee of plastic, only about that big. He was able to load up his MakerBot Replicator 2, I think he was using at the time, and print 20 of them and then scrape them off and go at the end of the day. It was just, like I said, it's just a little tee of plastic with a hole in it so you could put a square in it. He's not doing that business anymore because Square changed the way that their dongle held in place so that his product was no longer necessary. But for a little while, as I understand, he was paying the rent with his 3D printed little doodly bops that he made to solve a specific problem that people had. It was a very limited run business. It had a very small window of opportunity, and because he used 3D printing, he was able to get in, get out, and make the money that he could for that, and that's absolutely amazing. Now, are we going to see this for general products? Are we going to be able to go to Walmart and buy Tupperware that's been all 3D printed because that's a piece of plastic? No, because if you need tens of thousands of things, you're going to use a different manufacturing process. But if you only need 100, 500 of a thing, then 3D printing is more than viable for it. And I think that we'll see some more examples of it. But because there's such a low quantity, those examples will come and go and be gone, and they won't stick in our minds. But they're going to solve a problem that somebody has at one time, and that's very cool. And I think that that's really the promise of it. And the other side of this is you could be the one who figures out the solution that could be 3D printed and solve somebody's problem. I want to have another video about that topic in the future, but that's being an entrepreneur, and 3D printing can absolutely make that happen. Is it possible to start a print-on-demand business using 3D printers in 2019? I mean, possible? Sure, you could start a business doing anything you want, and there's nothing stopping you, but will you be successful in that business? Is there a market for that business? With any business, you kind of have to look at the competition. And if you're using cheap home 3D printers that you get at China, your competition is your 3D printer, because your customers are going to look at what you're providing as a service, and then they're going to look at the possibility of just getting that printer themselves, and they're going to weigh those two options. And you would have to charge, so you would practically have to be giving it away, your time and materials, for free to make that balance out. However, 3D print on demand businesses do exist, but they are doing things that people can't do at home. They've either got the high-end 3D printers, or they're doing it in materials that people can't generally get, or they're doing it in volumes that people can't generally get. And so, yes, it's possible, but you have to think about your competition. How can you differentiate your business so that it stands out and so that there is a reason for people to buy it? We are way beyond the day where people can just get a cheap 3D printer, put it out there and say, hey, I've got a 3D printer, you want me to print something, I'll charge you X, and people will do it. Now, 3D printers have come down in price so much that is no longer a viable business. But that doesn't mean that 3D printing in general, with the huge umbrella of 3D printing technologies that are covered by the name 3D printing, that doesn't mean that there isn't a business somewhere up there that you could do. You just have to treat it like a business and do something that your competition or your customer can't do for themselves. So try it out. What are your thoughts on metal 3D printing? It's a thing. It exists. It's not really for the home use. And in fact, the products that it produces also aren't for the home use. It's expensive. It's dirty. It's dangerous with, metal filings flying through the air and doing who knows what to your lungs. So, and what it produces, because it's so expensive and difficult to produce, they do produce like parts for airplanes in metal 3D printing. It's a totally welded piece, and so therefore they can use it for putting your body in the air to fly majestically through the sky like a bird, which is amazing. But as far as you getting a metal 3D print for your home, I know that Shapeways does that a little bit, but it's super expensive. It's super difficult to get into. And so it exists. It's a thing. It's mostly for industry right now. Will it ever go down to the home? Hey, who knows what's going to happen in the future. But right now, that's what it is. Are 3D printers going to be disabled from being able to 3D print firearm components? Oh boy, is this question ever going to go away? If you take control of a 3D printer in such a way that you can look at what people are making, first of all, how are you going to determine that what you're printing is a part for a gun and not just a cylinder with a hole through it? I mean, there are so many. You could look for a specific model. You could look for the Liberator, but it would be so easy to modify that without changing the functionality of the parts that what would you look? Just remesh it and the software would be thrown off. It's not feasible. And if it were done, and I think I've said this before, but like Disney would say, that thing that you're printing looks an awful lot like Elsa. You can't print it. Or McMaster Carr would say, that thing that you're printing, it looks an awful lot like one of the useful parts that we sell. They've already got the 3D models for everything that they sell. All they'd have to do is compare your print against that, and then they say, no, because that looks too much like what we would sell, so you have to pay us for that. Do you want that? I don't. I don't think it's worth it. And I think that in this case, the cure would be worse than the disease. And the disease is an ineffective plastic gun that can shoot one bullet at a time. Even the better model. Oh boy, I got a whole video on this subject that I need to get my gumption up and do. But no, I hope not. It could happen. There are people trying to make it happen, but please, just go make cool things. Don't worry about 3D printed guns. They're so far from being viable. They're so far from being worth it. Please. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want to. Let's move on. What software do you use to design 3D objects for 3D printing? Blender. All right, one last question. What are some pointless features in a 3D printer? Wow. I don't think there are any pointless features in a 3D printer. Not in any 3D printers that are there now, because most of them are so stripped down, so utilitarian that I almost think that we need to start getting some more pointless features in our 3D printers. I would love to have a 3D printer that had a built-in 3D scanner. I think that would be way awesome. Sure, it would be pointless. Half the time I wouldn't use it. Some people would say this 3D printer and my other 3D printer that used to be here has dual nozzles. And they would say, that's pointless. You never used a dual nozzle. And it's true. You rarely do use the dual nozzles, but half the time having that second nozzle is just so that I can experiment with one, or if one gets jammed and thrown out, I can still use it while I'm waiting for the time to be able to clear out the jam or get the part or fix the other 3D printer. I don't think dual nozzles are pointless at all. Another feature I'd like to see is better user interfaces. People might say, it's pointless. Marlin works just fine, but having a nice touchscreen is really, really very nice. Having it be able to have a camera on there so that we can take time lapses, or heaven forbid, one day maybe even look in on our prints and see how it's doing. Have it automatically look at your print and say, oh, well, hey, it was fine, and then it went like this, something went wrong, and stop the print, or notify you, send you a text message. That would be cool. That would be pointless, but that would be... Actually, I don't even think that would be pointless. You know what? No, there are no pointless features in 3D printers, and we need to get more 3D printers with questionably pointless features before we can really experience the future. So more pointless features. All right, so that's it for the Quora questions. But before I sign off today, I'm going to jump over to my Discord channel and check out the What Ya Makin' channel, where people post pictures and descriptions of projects that they are working on. So let's go take a look at what people on the Discord channel are making. Mr. Input is making this really cool print scale modeler tools. He says that this is it's a sander. It holds a piece of sandpaper in an arc. That is super cool, Mr. Input. X Crimson P says, I'm making D&D characters. Looking good. It's looking really good. Dog made a rolling pin that's embedded, so when you roll it over stuff, it leaves a printed pattern in it. That's super cool, Dog. Wellbot, which if you're not following Wellbot on Twitter, you really should. He does amazing work. He is working on a SpongeBob SquarePants and a Pinhead from some horror movies from the 80s, I guess. There you go. Dog is also making these cardboard screws. He saw these online and decided he would recreate them. You can use them to hold cardboard together for quick prototyping. It's pretty neat. I dig it. Cameron Phillips is making a Warframe fusion core with rotatable center. Really cool looking. Dog put googly eyes on his 3D printer head. That's adorable. Looks like Cameron Phillips had to do a repair to his heated build plate. That I had to do a similar one a long time ago, which I just took those pins that had burnt out and I soldered them directly onto the connectors. But he says he can't do that for whatever reason, so there you go. I Love Fate, I Love Doom. Looks like he is putting a camera on a VR headset so he could do augmented reality. So Dowg here says that he took a gear and in Fusion 360 extruded it out and then shaped it to make it into a vase, which is absolutely beautiful. We're coming up on the modern day as X Crimson has made a entirely unpractical ring. I have nothing to say to that one. And there we go. If you have something cool that you're making, why don't you come over to the Discord channel and go into the What You Making channel and show a picture of it, and maybe it'll show up in a future video. I can't wait to show those off, but thank you guys very much. Thank you very much for watching. Hey, if I mentioned anything in this video, you'll find a link to it in the cards, and you should check that out. Did you know that I'm social? I've got links to all the socials, and you should stop by and say hi. I really kind of enjoy it when that happens. Big thanks go out to my direct backers, and if you want to know more about how you can become that, there'll be a link right here that you can check out. And as always, I want to remind you, safety first, because I care about you. And I'll see you next time. Oh, that's interesting. Classic one there. All right, we're just doing this off the cuff, no script, no practice, no nothing. Let's just do it.